slowly sink southwards across northern Scotland. Quite a breezy day, gusts of 30 miles an hour or so, so it will feel quite cool in and around showers, top temperatures getting into the low 20s across the southeast. Monday evening we continue to see showers across the southern half of the UK, some of these heavy at times. That band of rain still slowly pushing its way southwards across Scotland. And then overnight into Tuesday morning, a more persistent spell of rain across southern counties of England and Wales. Here temperatures around 13 or 14 degrees, under clearer skies further north, perhaps dipping into single figures. So a wet start across southern counties of the UK Tuesday morning. This rain slips away, and then generally it's a day of sunshine and showers across the whole of the country. Some of these could be heavy at times, perhaps.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Congratulations to GB News Breakfast, voted by you as the nation's best multi-channel news programme at the prestigious Trick Awards.
Good evening, I'm Rhiannon Jones. Here are your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The grandmother of a boy killed by police in Paris during a traffic stop is urging protesters to end the riots. The French government's holding crisis talks this evening to address the civil unrest after a fifth night of violence. Nahel Mazouk's grandmother says rioters are using his death as an excuse to cause havoc. The family has called for calm. The city's regional president says she's confident order will be restored.
What's happening is ultra-violence by small groups of people that are very well organized and very well trained, and they want to defy the Republic. And the Republic will not yield, and we will fight back.
The regional president also met a mayor whose home was ram-raided and set alight in a Parisian suburb. His wife and one of his children were hurt. Prosecutors say an attempted murder investigation has now been opened. French journalist Antonin André says it's put yet more pressure on President Emmanuel Macron.
His family were attacked in his house during the night, and his wife and his 2 children had to left the house in emergency because there was fire in the house. And this is what is a very shocking thing this morning. And every mayors in France wants that the state and Emmanuel Macron take more measures to stop the chaos.
2 people have been killed in a mass shooting in the US state of Maryland. Police say up to 30 people suffered gunshot wounds. 3 are in a critical condition. The attack happened in the city of Baltimore, where people had gathered for an event called Brooklyn Day. The suspect or suspects are reportedly still at large. The US President will meet King Charles and the Prime Minister when he visits the UK next week. Buckingham Palace has confirmed Joe Biden will visit Windsor Castle on the 10th of July. The White House says he's travelling to London to strengthen the close relationship between the nations. He'll then head to Lithuania for the NATO summit before going to Finland. New measures to deal with disruptive demonstrations have come into force. They include expanded police powers to move on static or slow-walking protests, like those used by Just Stop Oil. A criminal offence to tackle disruption in tunnels has also been introduced, carrying jail terms of up to 3 years. Critics say the laws threaten the right to protest. And rail passengers are facing yet more disruption over the next week. ASLEF members at 16 train companies in England will refuse to work overtime, which operators rely on to run their full timetable. The union says it's calling for fair pay, but the rail delivery group says ASLEF rejected its last offer of a £5,000 raise, which would have brought the basic salary for drivers working a 4-day week to nearly £65,000. Services will be affected from Monday through to Saturday. TV online, DAB Plus radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News. Now it's over to Free Speech Nation.
Good evening. France goes up in flames. Labour MP Jess Phillips is accused of outright racism by the redoubtable Catherine Birbalsingh, and the war on the right and wrong think has reached the banking sector. This is Free Speech Nation. So welcome to Free Speech Nation with me, Simon Evans, standing, or rather sitting in for Andrew Doyle this week. And if I know Andrew, he's currently on a sunbed somewhere downing his 12th pint of the evening. Actually, that is not true. He'll be feeding the donkeys on Sark. This is the show where we take a look at culture, current affairs and politics. And of course, we'll have the latest from those lovable culture warriors who appear to have turned on each other this week as Just Stop Oil activists have been interrupting a pride march. Don't you just love to see it? Coming up on the show tonight, members of the band Whom by Fire are here to tell us how they were cancelled from performing at a folk festival because the organisers didn't agree with a single social media post. We'll get the latest from Washington as the race for the White House hots up and the Supreme Court has made a stand against affirmative action in universities. And of course, myself and my fantastic panel will be answering questions from our wonderful studio audience. All that and much more tonight on Free Speech Nation. My studio guests this evening are comedians Cressida Wetton and Steve N. Allen. Please give them a round of applause. So, Cressida, you probably have more experience with this format than I do. Are you
Possibly, but also some of the audience members might as well, because we do get some repeat offenders, don't we?
Do you think do you get like a 3-for-2 deal or something? You come along. Have you seen any of these people before, Steve?
I'm not allowed to normally within 50 yards of them, so actually this is what I'm
OK, well, let's kick off with our first question from the audience. Our first question comes from Armin.
Hello. Can my bank account
eject me from my Conservative views.
Can your bank account reject you from your bank and your bank refuse to do further business with you because they don't like your politics? This, of course, is particularly pertinent to GB News, as it's our very own Nigel Farage, who was the latest this week to claim his bank account's been closed without explanation, but he is presuming it's his politics rather than his dress sense that has caused them some disquiet. The GB News presenter said he'd been with a prestigious banking group. He has not named them, but I believe they come in a number of varieties, one of which is famously bald. For more than 40 years. He received a letter from the bank telling him his personal and business accounts were being closed. So that is rather a worrying development. I mean, I've had a bank account closed about 30 years ago. I was with NatWest. I got a letter from one day. I was about £47 overdrawn, and they were just tired of it all, I think, to be honest. But
that was back when £47 could buy you a house.
That's right, yes. Back then I was saving up my overdraft, absolutely. But this is a worrying trend. We know our friends at Trigonometry have had their bank accounts closed recently, and I believe a number of other GB News presenters as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's a win that anyone's looking for. I think even if you thoroughly hate everything that Nigel Farage has ever said or done, you don't walk away with a victory going, well, now he's with a different bank. Argue the points. Get the point across that you want to about Brexit or whatever it is. I do think this story splits into two. There's all the stories of people who've said things to their bank, written a letter to their bank and had their account closed. Yeah. We actually don't know whether it is Nigel Farage's views, because he may have been identified as a politically exposed person, which is less rude than it sounds. And if that is the case, then there are other questions to ask the bank. Why are you getting rid of people because they cause you more admin? But that's separate to this culture.
That is separate, and that is an EU thing, of course, which he would in turn regard as demonstrative. Yeah, absolutely. But I have heard also about some people who have had their bank accounts closed because they asked, perhaps noisily, perhaps rudely, in the branch why the place was festooned with pride flags and that sort of thing.
Well, it's still not a reason to make somebody stand in the cash payment aisle in Lidl, is it? I mean, that's...
Is there a cash payment aisle?
Oh, yes,
Because I have some cash. No, I shouldn't be...
Well, it happens to comedians, so they get paid in cash and then you have to go and stand a lot longer in the queue. This is a real issue. Anyway, it's terrible. And I don't think disagreeing with the flags in a branch is an appropriate reason, is it? As Steve said, it's not a win that anybody wants.
And we have also, noticed, generally speaking, you know, there are a lot of people now who are being denied access to banking services just geographically as well. This is a massive thing in rural areas where branches close and old people can't pay for their cleaners and so on. Anyway, our next question comes from Alan. Where is Alan? There he is. How could I miss you, Alan?
Hi there. As Jeremy Clarkson has apologised for his column on Meghan Markle, is it right that he's now being labelled a sexist?
Well, that is a good question. A column by Jeremy Clarkson, as I'm sure many of you will remember, this was a couple of months ago, I think it came out, wasn't it, in which he said he was dreaming of the Duchess of Sussex being paraded naked in the street, and the press regulator has finally got round to ruling this as being sexist. He claims it was, in fact, a reference to the Game of Thrones, which he had failed to include that reference in the text, which would have situated it in a much more palatable context, obviously. But he got a record 25,000 people complaining to Ipso for that, which I suppose I don't know whether you get a cup or a trophy or something for that, but that's the Independent Press Standards Organisation. 25,000 independently outraged by that. The imagery was humiliating and degrading towards the Duchess. He has claimed that he's not a sexist. He is obviously quite happy with some of his more antediluvian views, but he regards himself as actually pretty clean on the sexism front. He would always be stridently opposed to men being presumed to be better drivers and so on when he was presenting Top Gear. What do you think? Do you feel that rings true?
I'm surprised. I'm not surprised that people don't like this, and you can indeed say there are humiliating parts of the column. Of course, the purpose of that imagery is to humiliate. But I don't necessarily see where the link is to the sexism, because last time I checked, I'm a man and all of those things. And if someone said they dream of me walking naked through the streets, covered in excrement, I don't think I'd be like, well, it's all right, I'm a bloke, I'd say. I don't like it. It's wrong in either direction, so I don't necessarily see the sexism link. Like, the racism link wasn't... the investigation didn't find any racism. I just don't see why there's sexism. There's definitely humiliation, but why is it specifically linked to her gender?
It does seem, doesn't it? There's a tendency to try and determine which dynamics are at play and unspoken.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I read was they thought that it was sexist because he'd only compared her to other women he hates. And I thought, well, you've brought that. That's your own projection. I mean, he's allowed to compare 3 women, isn't he? That's
Yes.
all right. Yeah, pretty shocking. I reread it this morning, and I'm of the opinion generally, like, oh, come on, guys, relax. And I read it, and I did think, oh, yeah, it's... And he was sort of implying that he'd written it late at night, maybe he'd had half a bottle of red and a few scotches, but it had to go through the editorial process, didn't it? So somebody somewhere in an office went, yeah, that seems fine.
I always think that is the thing, isn't it? Where was the editor in all of this? But it is interesting how we hear these dog whistles all the time. I mean, the most famous example, of course, at the moment, in the last sort of 3 or 4 years, was the murder of George Floyd, found to be a murder. But the racism element obviously drove all of the protests against it, and yet that was completely unproven in court. There was no suggestion, in fact, wasn't even mentioned. But it's always the projection afterwards. Our next question is from Birdie. Who is Birdie? There is Birdie. Hello, Birdie. What have you got for us?
What is a bonus hole, and why do I keep seeing it everywhere?
You're seeing the bonus hole, or seeing the term bonus hole being used? That's important distinction. Bonus hole is the latest toe-curling euphemism for vagina, I believe. I think for the female genitals, the whole package, and it's come from Joe's. I say packaging maybe, but anyway, we see. Joe's Cervical Cancer Trust, who you would assume were familiar with the biology involved, they were in partnership with the LGBT Foundation, and this week they offered that alternative vocabulary for women's genitalia to increase inclusivity in medical language. So this is presumably, by calling it a bonus hole, is meant to alleviate the pressure felt by trans people when they're discussing it. Because I honestly, apart from the fact that it is absolutely, as I say, toe-curling, it's embarrassing, it's like something out of a 70s game show or something.
I thought
Nuts Magazine
was bad. I thought, who thought the Cervical Cancer Trust would have read Zoo? But it turns out they do.
None of these attempts ever achieve what they're intended to, which is to try and take the heat out of the situation. They just infuriate people. And I think those who are... it is hoped might be, included in the conversation, end up being blamed for some cack-handed attempt by some well-intentioned charity. If anything, we just then bracket the people who were the intended beneficiaries of this with the would-be Orwellian dictionary rewriter.
Yes, and instead of seeing it as a bit of a silly error, we see it as, it was their plan all along.
Yes.
I don't think it solves a problem. That's one point I need to address, that I don't think anyone who has a vagina will be like, oh no, I don't know what it is. Because what will happen in a conversation, you'll have it called a bonus hole. They'll say, what's that? A vagina. Oh, and we're back to page 1. We know what it is. And also, just to address the point, why are you seeing bonus holes everywhere? Have you been staring at one for a long while? When you close your eyes, do you still see one? I'm glad you checked.
I would have thought the popular family term front pocket. That's the one.
But it ruins a game of snooker.
Absolutely. Well, now our next question is from Winter, who has presumably come a long way.
Just recoiling from the last.
I do apologise, Winter. It's not what you expected in an afternoon panel, is it? No.
This is a very interesting question because you can read it in different ways, considering the state of the world at the moment. Is a panel of women well placed to talk about men's issues?
Yes, OK. So this will be Lorraine Kelly, who was interviewing... remind me of her name.
Caitlin Moran?
Caitlin Moran, yes, or Moran, possibly. Caitlin Moran or Caitlin Moran, depending on which part of Ireland you originally come from. And they were discussing Caitlin's new book, I think, weren't they? Which is... She wrote a book a few years ago, which was How to Be a Woman. And actually, having recently married one and then shortly afterwards become a father to another potential one, I found that book quite useful. I thought it was quite insightful and honest, and it generated all sorts of interesting conversations. But, of course, that sold as many copies as it's going to now, and she needs a new angle. And so they've decided to talk about men. Now, suicide is still the biggest cause of death for men under 50 in the UK. And when you hear that statistic, it's always rather alarming. But, of course, the reason that is because almost all the other causes of death in the UK have been eliminated due to medical science.
Yeah.
You're right, it's a good thing.
We're not committing suicide at a higher rate than we used to, or anything. But she seems to think, and Lorraine and Catelyn sat in their studio and discussed the fact that the problem is that men don't have conversations in the ladies' loo. Well, of course, that is in itself an issue at the moment, isn't it? Anyway.
You can hear, though, can't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
What do you think? Is it appropriate for women? I mean, what a lot of people said was if two men had gone on telly and said, well, this is what the trouble with women is, that they need to be like men and go for, you know, and learn how to sink 13 pints of lager on a Friday night. And
whereas we tend to have that conversation before the show starts.
Yes, absolutely.
No,
yeah.
I think it's perfectly fine because I understand the counter-argument, the comparison, but all you're doing is trying to bring in that second wrong to make a two wrongs.
Yeah.
Of course, either side of this debate should be able to have a voice on it, because that way people talk about it, rather than it being, no, you can't say that, I'll disclude your point of view, not because I actually managed to disagree with it, I just find you invalid due to something on a form. No, I think everyone should be able to talk about men or women's issues.
How would you feel, Krista, if somebody were to write a book, if a man was to write a book about women's mental health issues, full of useful advice?
I'd be absolutely flattered and flabbergasted. I think, oh my God, somebody's listening, somebody cares. I don't know. They often say, don't they, that men need to open up and talk about it. I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, I love talking, but I'm female. I'm not sure you should keep beating teenage boys over the head with this idea that, well, it's your own fault 'cause you need to talk about it.
You should probably actually literally beat them over the head. I mean,
they'd probably prefer that, exactly. Yeah. Then they could have a nice wrestling match or whatever you guys like to do, and that might help. I don't know.
Yeah. Bit of square bashing. Our next question is from Barry. Again, has obviously travelled. Hello.
Hi. Do you think the Royal Air Force is racist?
Well, of course, this is... you're not asking my opinion, of course, because I have very little experience of it, but the Royal Air Force has apparently been unlawfully discriminating against white men in a recruitment drive aimed at boosting diversity. An official inquiry has found that to be the case. Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton, the new head of the RAF, said he apologised unreservedly to all those affected, blaming the debacle on legal advice. What do you think, Cressida?
Well, I think we often hear people say, oh, you just want the best person for the job. And I can't think of an example where that is more relevant. I think if you're, what do they call it, in the team, in the squad, I don't even know the words, you definitely want your colleagues to be the absolute cream of the crop, don't you? And to start interfering with the recruitment process does seem not a good idea to me.
And I suppose there is that, there's the independent, individual element of skill, the talent, whatever, that you're looking for, but also the esprit de corps that will hopefully arise from knowing you've all been picked in that traditional Top Gun way.
I suppose, although, I mean, that argument, I hadn't thought of that argument, but that could lead to that, what do they call it, the unconscious bias, where you only hire people who fit the same profile as you.
Yeah.
But I think this is definitely a case where they got it wrong. If your attempts to correct an issue to do with diversity breaks the Equality Act, you got it wrong. Your goal may well have been fine, but that doesn't necessarily mean your execution of it has worked perfectly.
Yeah, they have. I mean, there's all sorts of surveys and reports and so on that have demonstrated that the more blind you can recruit, the better. In fact, even an interview is often counterproductive, even though most people feel that would be naturally part of a recruitment process. It could be quite literally the best thing you can do is to have everyone assigned a number or a completely neutral name automatically by an algorithm.
Perhaps they could have a voice-changing app and put them in a confession box. And instead of a priest on the other side, it's Captain... Again, I don't know the words. That's a solution, maybe.
Well, maybe. I mean, anyone who actually watched Top Gun Maverick, we're all aware that fighter planes are being phased out in favour of drones now anyway, so it's all highly, like, academic, but still. After the break on Free Speech Nation, I'll be joined by members of the band Whom by Fire, whom were recently cancelled from a gig, they say, because of comments they posted online. Don't go away, back in a moment.
First and foremost, I'm a GBNews fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different.
It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. So last weekend, the Essex band Whom by Fire were all set to grace the stage at the Lee Folk Festival. But a few days before the gig, they were cancelled. And of course, ended up as all cancelled individuals and organisations do on this programme. The reason organisers gave: the festival is an inclusive environment that stands with the deep breath LGBTQIA+ community. The band claims the organisers didn't mention which online comments they were referring to, but they believe it concerns one band member questioning the sexualisation of children in schools, which is presumably represented by one of those initials I gave earlier, and a book reading at Southend Pride by an author who reportedly advocates paedophilia. Well, here to tell us all about it, band members Eliza Mells and Dan Halamandras, is that correct?
That's it.
Dan,
that's it,
thank
yep.
you very much. Dan. So let me start with you, Eliza. Before we get on to the meat of the subject, Whom by Fire? What's that all about then?
So we love Leonard Cohen.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great inspiration to a lot of Dan's songwriting and guitar playing in particular.
And that was one of his song titles?
Yeah, Who by Fire.
That's what I thought, it was Who by Fire. So you've given it the extra M for legal reasons. So the estate of Leonard Cohen.
That's right.
Does that give us a sense of the kind of music you guys like? Leonard Cohen folk, is that sort of roughly what we're hearing?
Yeah.
Slightly miserablest, but a bit of mandolin to pick it up at the end.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So would you have regarded yourselves as a political band, or do you think of yourself as a sort of protest, like a right-wing marching band kind of thing?
Nothing like that, no.
So was it one of you who wrote the post?
Well, they didn't say which band member it was, but we kind of thought it's probably me.
It is you, isn't it? And had you had a few ciders?
No, probably not. I think I wrote it in the morning, but...
Yeah.
So probably not
So, I mean,
quite.
obviously, it is quite a serious issue, sexualisation of children, and obviously it is an issue that we've been covering on GB News for a while. Was there a particular incident of it that you'd seen in...
Our local Southend Pride had been promoting a book reading event by an author called Mario Melli.
Yep.
I'm not sure if that's the correct pronunciation. And he was an author who reportedly advocated for paedophilia.
And so obviously that's a bit...
Like, really directly, or you're reading between the lines, the paedophilia? Because few people actually come out and, like, really, you know, strongly in favour of that.
Well, it's quite easy to, like, research into it, but according to a brief biog that I read, I think he sort of said paedophilia, necrophilia and several other things were ripe for redemption.
OK,
so,
right.
Sounds like he liked it.
How did you feel about that, Eliza?
Oh, I didn't know about it until we were told we were cancelled, and I was like, oh, what's Dan written now? Let's have a little look. So
I mean, I'm going to express probably a rather old-fashioned, stereotypical view here of Southend, but I've never really seen it as a hotbed of what I think of as West Coast American liberal progressive politics. Has something happened since the last time I was there?
Well, it's Southend City now.
Yeah. Has it changed? Seriously, though. I mean, last time I was there, it was mainly karate shops. That's what I remember.
Yeah. I think there is definitely an element of...
Is there? The long march through the institutions has reached the pier.
I'm not quite sure what that means, but it sounds about right.
Well, the long march through the institutions was the idea, like, decades ago, that in order to, to induce the West, which was, like, you know, enjoying the benefits of capitalism, we were never going to have a Marxist revolution, so instead all the academics had to get themselves into the British Museum and the universities and so on, and, you know, that's why we've all seen it sort of come up from the inside. But I would have assumed, Lee, Onsi and so on were well, like straight, good old-fashioned British sort of values and so on. But no, it's become quite woke, has it?
There's definitely an element.
Yeah. So they haven't actually said to you, the organisers of the festival, exactly what it was, but this is what they think it was.
No, we've had, since being cancelled, we've had pretty much radio silence, but we have spoken to some possible complainants who did pretty much say that that's what it was. So,
and are they people who were appearing at the festival?
Some of them would have been, or definitely they would have been at the festival as just regular festival goers.
Yeah. How do you feel about it? I mean, is it a massive blow, or are you just going to kind of weather it and carry on, or is it an opportunity to rebrand yourself as warriors now?
It was a shock, and it's been a bit of a whirlwind since it happened, definitely. Have
you heard from any fans about it? Oh,
I was just about to say, it's just it has been an incredible support from all across the world, really. Showing love and respect and everything. So it's been, it's actually been really positive. Yeah.
Well, this sort of thing
turned
around. I remember a couple of years ago, Jerry Sadowitz, who was a famously offensive comedian, was finally cancelled at the Edinburgh Fringe years after people have been going, how come Jerry's still going?
Right.
And the next thing you know, he gets 2 nights at the Hammersmith Apollo because he creates the, and it was a genuine cancellation, but maybe that's the next stop.
Yeah, I mean, like, our album sales have gone up, so...
Have they? They have. Even more than performing at the Lee Festival.
Well, I like to say Lee Folk Festival are actually our unofficial sponsors now, because they've really helped us.
Thank you.
I'm hoping you don't use Gillette razors to shape your face into that elegant beard, because they're a famously woke brand, aren't they? I think it's Harry's are the anti-woke razors. You've got to know. But I mean, have you been offered any other gigs or festivals?
Yeah, quite a lot actually. I mean, we've literally our social media likes have gone through the roof. We've been having like various offers, so it's been like really overwhelming and really touching actually. So thank you to everyone that's supported us.
Are you going to write a song about it?
Well, funny enough,
throw the paedophile down the well, something like that.
we actually recorded a song as a direct response yesterday.
Right.
Recorded it and mixed it, and it's available to download on our Bandcamp.
Fantastic.
So you can do that now.
And what's the song called?
It's called The Freedom Song.
I like the sound of that. Well, we will just give it, for the benefit of equality and balance, a festival spokesperson has said Leave Folk Festival is and has always been an inclusive environment where everyone should feel welcome and comfortable, even paedophiles. No, they don't say that. They don't say that. I have extrapolated. It's been brought to our attention that a member of an act due to perform at this year's festival has made remarks online that are not in keeping with Leave Folk Arts values. As soon as we were made aware the act's performance was pulled from the lineup, we or our curators would never knowingly book an artist known for this kind of behaviour and apologise for any worry, anxiety or distress this has caused. I mean, it's boilerplate crap, isn't it? That's the trouble. They spout this stuff. They don't even write it. They peel it off as like Letraset. I don't understand how they think they can get away with that. It's like, do they think people won't do their own research?
Well, and it's disgusting that they haven't responded to us and actually given a reason to us, to our faces.
Yeah. Because this is the trouble with... Everyone approves of the idea of inclusivity in principle, but of course inclusivity nowadays is more often used as an opportunity to exclude, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yep.
There we are. Thank you very much to Elijah and Dan, ladies and gentlemen. The new Leonard Cohen. So, after the break on Free Speech Nation, we'll be looking at comments made by outgoing Minister Zach Goldsmith that Rishi Sunak's government isn't taking the environment seriously enough. Back in a couple of moments.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Britain's news channel.
And And welcome back. So later in the show, I'll be turning agony uncle with the help of my panel, Cressida Wetton and Steve N. Allen, to help you deal with your unfiltered dilemmas. If you would like to have one of those problems answered by our expert panel, email us at GBViews. You can see that, I hope, on the screen, gbviews@gbnews.com. We'll try to answer your issues. In the meanwhile, on Friday, Tory Minister Zac Goldsmith publicly clashed with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak after resigning from the government with an attack on the Prime Minister's apathy towards the environment. In response, Mr Sunak accused the Conservative peer of quitting rather than apologising for his role in a campaign to undermine a parliamentary committee's probe into Boris Johnson, of whom Mr Goldsmith is a well-known backer. So, obviously a rather tangled knot there. Here to discuss this Tory tit-for-tat and whether Zac Goldsmith has a right to make claims on the government's green agenda, whether those claims are correct. Please welcome visiting professor at London South Bank University, James Woodhyson. Have I pronounced your surname correctly, Woodhyson?
That's about Woodhausen. But
Woodhausen. OK, they've spelt it in a sort of weird Dutch way. I don't know if they're trying to align you.
I'm weird. I'm Dutch.
OK, not via South Africa as well, because Goldsmith's one of the.
You can't accuse me of that.
Can't pin that on you.
No.
OK, so give us a bit of background on this.
Well, you know, Zac Goldsmith, I've got to be very careful what I say. He's worth £300 million, and he made the right move in attacking the Parliamentary Privileges Committee for its kangaroo court that it held about Boris Johnson. I'm no defender of Boris Johnson, but I do believe that anybody who upsets Harriet Harman MP gets my vote. She has now escalated it so that any MP, and next it'll be you and me, who has a go at the Privileges Committee, which enjoys a great amount of privilege, is going to be, you know, for the chop. Yeah. And I think he was quite right to have a go at them. Where I think he's completely wrong is to attack the Sunak government for not going far enough on green matters. Just this morning we've learnt that they're going to erect pylons all over the country to carry the enormous amount of electric charge that is going to be needed for all the squillions of electric cars that are suddenly going to appear after 2030 and 2035. It's all rubbish. The government is moving ahead to restrict our rights through low traffic networks, through heat pumps, through everything, really. And the only problem for Zac Goldsmith was it wasn't doing enough of that repression.
Right. So that's interesting. So on the one hand, we regard him as a champion of free speech and the right to resist parliamentary overreach, and on the other hand, he's talking a lot of hot air on the green issue thing.
I wouldn't say he was a champion for it. I mean, who has ever heard of Zac Goldsmith until he resigned?
Sir Jimmy's son, right?
Sorry?
Sir James'
Sir
son?
James Goldsmith, the Marmite King, who was head of Cavendish Foods before you were born.
Well, no, I remember Sir James because he was one of the bête noire of Private Eye throughout the 1980s and 90s, along with Tiny Rowland and so on. Yeah, they were late. They never departed the back pages of Private Eye. Zac is, by comparison, a fairly mild-mannered sort of figure.
Well, I think if you look at his love for Lord Deben, the head of the Climate Change Committee, if you take his record of support for David Cameron, for Boris Johnson, for Liz Truss, for Rishi Sunak, I wouldn't describe his green views as mild at all. I'd say they were ferociously batty, myself.
Ferociously batty? That's a powerful phrase.
Yeah. Well, he's in love with indigenous peoples, and the next thing you'll know, he'll have a ring through his nose because of the special knowledge they have about the planet. And really interesting, if you read the Observer editorial today, you know, they endorse his resignation because they think that Boris was terrific about the environment. Now, there was a time when they didn't like Boris and grandees like Zac Goldsmith, but now, just because they make enough green noises, they get the Guardian vote.
He's got the sort of Chief Seattle speech that all things are connected and all that sort of business.
All of that,
we cannot eat money and so on.
But, the mysticism that envelops the green movement really is quite
I do
shocking.
want to ask you about the electric cars thing, since you raised that, and I didn't know the pylons were going up. I live in Brighton and Hove, which is, of course, famously... Well, absolutely. Famously in hoc to green thinking, but it's been interesting recently. Caroline Lucas, the MP for the Central constituency, of which I'm not a part, I'm under Peter Kyle, who's actually a reasonably moderate sort of Labour MP. But we have had a lot of Greens in our council, and they've been turfed out recently in the most recent council elections because people were fed up of the incoherent and sort of totemic policies that didn't actually work on the ground. And their effort to try and make green motorists the coming thing is so totally at odds with the availability of charging units. I mean, it's just absolutely absurd.
Well, I don't really go too much on the charging units thing, Simon, because it's really Grant Shapps's complaint. You know, I've got a big electric roller. Where are my charging units? You know, and that doesn't apply to most of us. That's not the problem. The problem is if you actually bother to read, struggle through the 400 or 600 pages of the Climate Change Committee, unelected, Lord Deben, lots of Greens. If you go through their report, they're, adamant that the 2030 ban on petrol and diesel vehicles must go ahead. That throughout that report, the phrase used cars is not in that report.
Right.
There are 7 million, going on 8 million used cars of internal combustion engine variety sold in the country every year. There's absolutely no way that they're going to go away in a hurry. There are 35 million cars on the country's roads, 33 to 35 million. At the moment, the car sales of electric cars are 700,000 or maybe 1 million. If you ended them on 2030, like Zach and all the zealots would like, why Van Man is going to go mad, Autocar and Auto Trader are going to go mad, and anybody who doesn't live on the London Underground is going to be pretty cross.
Yeah.
So they're just living in utopia land, but the consequence is, one of the things that the CEO of the Climate Change Committee, Chris Stark, who has a wonderful background in the Scottish Treasury, so he knows everything about your and my kind of money, he said, that one of the real problems with the government is not entertaining the idea of actually cutting back on the number of cars on our roads. So, like our Malthusian friends always want to cull the population, starting with you, not them.
Yeah.
They want to stop you driving your cars kind of now,
But can I ask you, is there, I think you will be speaking to preaching to the choir to a large extent on the GB News network, but is there anyone you can vote for to demonstrate your enthusiasm for the petrol-driven future? It seems like the two main parties are offering scant differences.
My slogan is "Run, Simon, run."
Yeah.
I'll vote for you. I'll vote for anybody in the audience. I will not vote for Zach Goldsmith. I will not vote for Harriet Harman. And don't talk to me about David Miliband. We are really going backwards. And I like the environment. I like animals, as long as I don't identify as an animal. I like planets.
The joke is usually I couldn't eat a whole one, but of course with animals you possibly could. I don't know.
No, I think you've lost me there, Simon.
Well, I like children, but I couldn't eat a whole one. I can't remember who that was. But
I'm not going there. But what we need is normal people to stand up and have the facts at their fingertips and the coherent arguments to rebut this green madness. Because what it really is about is rationing our energy, stopping our mobility, and never insulting Harriet Harman again. It's repressive, it's reactionary, and it's no way forward for this country.
And, of course, the other issue which ties in with it is in terms of fuel security, energy security, which was, of course, the Ukraine war came in with almost extraordinarily, almost implausible, perfect timing with the elevation of the green agenda.
Well, the green argument on that is that wind power is 9 times cheaper than gas-fired power stations. That's based on an article in the Carbon Brief, which has been completely dismantled by anybody who knows anything. So, they're not right about it being cheaper, but they do argue that, in order to establish energy security, the best thing is to use renewables, otherwise known as unreliables.
Yeah.
It is not true, because what's going to happen, what's already happening, is we're buying a shed load of shale gas from America, some from Russia as well, because we can't do without it. Gas, you might not like it, it's going to be around for decades. rights, and that's a fact. You know, you can't undo it. It's not intermittent.
And the stuff we get will probably end up being dirtier in many regards than it would have been if we'd made it at home.
Well, you know, I'm not sure I buy the whole term clean energy, dirty energy, right? Clean energy means energy from China, because it's China that's doing all the wind turbines, it's China that's especially doing the solar panels, it's China that does the electric vehicles. If you want to talk about mining cobalt with your hands as a child, as 40,000 children do in the oh-so-democratic Republic of the Congo, that ain't clean, folks. Nobody can call that clean.
Steer my daughter towards that as a gap year, but it didn't come out that way.
Steer her towards...
See how the other half have lived.
What, mining with your hands?
Well, you know, it would have warmed her up, I think, for
You're
3
a tough
years at
guy,
university.
Simon,
James Woodhousen, ladies and gentlemen, our guest. Visiting expert on the so-called Green Agenda. After the break on Free Speech Nation, we have the latest from a divided United States, and this week a controversial decision by the Supreme Court to end affirmative action at universities. We'll be discussing that in a couple of minutes.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
And action.
Sergeant, we're being read by superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to Free Speech Nation. So the US Supreme Court, SCOTUS, as it is often referred as, I know, but that's what it's called, has ruled that universities cannot consider a prospective student's race in isolation when deciding admission. The ruling ends in decades-long practice of so-called affirmative action. Positive discrimination is the term preferred in the UK, where universities could take race into account in order to improve or at least change diversity. Affirmative action first made its way into US policy in the 1960s following the civil rights legislation, as many all-white schools began admitting minority students. However, the court, just like US society, has divided sharply on ideological lines. Increasingly since then, the 6 conservative justices in the majority heralded this decision as a step towards a more colourblind society where students will be measured by their accomplishments, the quality of their character, in King's famous phrase, rather than their race. The 3 liberals, on the other hand, condemned the ruling, arguing that it ignored the ongoing reality of discrimination in America. To discuss this issue and get the latest on the race for the White House, I'm joined from Washington by John Christopher Buer, the White House correspondent for Real Political News. Hello, John.
Simon, a pleasure. You're much better looking than I thought.
Oh, that's because I've replaced the usual host. That's that's very kind of you. So, just give us a little bit of background in your own words. I've given a certain sort of summary of it, but just so that we're on the same page.
I think your summary was fairly accurate. We've been going through the civil rights movement here in this country, equal rights for all. And it's a very interesting and historic day. Today, in 1964, Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act in front of Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, and J. Edgar Hoover, believe it or not, and others. And it was the beginning of what we considered a real civil rights movement in this country, started by Eisenhower, believe it or not, JFK, moving to LBJ, and we moving through this time. And the court ruling is basically, the ruling is one of what I call the Trump SCOTUS legacy court. And he projected and he predicted that he would be putting conservative judges on the court. And he did just that to satisfy his MAGA Republicans and hoping that he gets reelected again in 2024.
So it's quite interesting to me. There are at least 2 elements here that are separately interesting. One is what you've just said, that what some people regard as a significant strategic legacy of the Trump administration. Some people blame Ruth Bader Ginsburg for not resigning when she had an opportunity to, in fact, and allowing President Obama to replace her. But that has actually backfired to an extent, hasn't it? Because they've overturned Roe v. Wade, which a lot of people think actually fired up the Democratic base during the midterms and saw a much bigger turnout for the Democrats there than might otherwise have been actuated. So maybe this could be another strategic sort of the law of unintended consequences, if you like.
Well, you're very astute, and I've taught politics in the media for 13 years here in university, and you'd be fine. You could come and speak to my class. You really understand the history of it and how we get to this point. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in fact, she decided to stick on, and we didn't get an appointee by President Obama, and we had a problem. The Democrats had a problem with that, and now we have what we have. So we have to deal with that. And 2022 was supposed to be a red wave and get the Republicans in there, and they barely kept on to the House, as you know, and they don't have the Senate. So it's going to be a raucous and a very, very, very difficult time for all involved, but except for the political analysts and those who make the ads, for the political ads for 2024.
But in terms of affirmative action itself, one of the issues which was raised repeatedly in the demands that this be revisited was that it had been biased against Asian students, that is, Asian American students, that they were the ones that were missing out. The perception, perhaps, that it's a black-white issue was overly simplified, and in fact it was highly qualified, highly educated, hard-working Asian students who were being denied places. Is that a fair assessment?
I don't think so. I think I went to a free school. I went to the City University, which is City College, and we had an equal amount of Asian students, and we had many Black and Hispanic, Latinos and Latinas, and this is quite a while ago, and we all felt that we were part of the system. And I think that's what we need to feel, that we are part of the system in this country, and we're all treated equally. Now, that is a particular issue that will be dealt with. And the fact is that we'll see how this plays out. But I think it's to deny young people who haven't had the chance to, in their own background and their own social background to be advanced on to university is a shame. And it's not what we're about here in America.
But it wouldn't be denying them a place at university, would it? It's more whether you get into the prestigious universities, whether places like Harvard and Yale have been discriminating against the best qualified students. There are enough other universities for people of all abilities to go to because it's an extraordinarily profitable business to be in, isn't it? Draining the college funds out of well-intentioned middle-class parents.
Well, I think that some schools are free. If you're in a state, your tuition is much less. If you want to go to Harvard or Yale or Princeton or Stanford, it's going to be a lot more. Now, the fact is, we have another thing called the elite legacy. In other words, if you have a dorm or a building or a school named after you, you basically can get in. I mean, that's the real problem. So that kind of elitism is something that we try to go around and offer a leg up to those students who need one.
Can I just ask you, and this will probably be to wrap up, would you expect Lyndon B. Johnson and so on, when they were drafting and passing this legislation and trumpeting the affirmative action specifically, I think that came a couple of years later, do you think they would have thought that 50 years would have been enough, or was this intention to be forever, that black students should always be given preferential grades, or do you think it was intended to sort of smooth the transition into a new, bright, new, brave new world?
Well, I lived through that era. I lived through the Vietnam era. I lived through the civil rights era. And it was very contentious. It was difficult. And I think LBJ had the forethought to think in advance of that. Remember, many of the things that Kennedy tried to put through, LBJ, because he had such savvy in Congress, actually could get them through. And he's considered quite a hero. It was the Vietnam War that took him down. But we still consider him domestically a very fine president.
Thank you so much, Don. Absolute pleasure speaking to you. I'll be in touch about that position offer. There is lots more to come between now and 9 o'clock, including exclusive footage from the World Wife Carrying Championships and lots more besides. See you in a couple of minutes.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. There's plenty more still to come on Free Speech Nation this week. But first, let's get a news update from Rhiannon Jones.
Simon, thank you. Good evening. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The grandmother of a boy killed by police in Paris during a traffic stop is urging protesters to end the riots. The French government is holding crisis talks this evening to address the civil unrest after a fifth night of violence. Nahel Mazouk's grandmother says rioters are using his death as an excuse to cause havoc. The family has called for calm. The city's regional president says she's confident order will be restored.
What's happening is ultra-violence by small groups of people that are very well organized and very well trained, and they want to defy the Republic. And the Republic will not yield, and we will fight back.
The regional president has also met a mayor whose home was ram-raided and set alight in a Parisian suburb last night. His wife and one of his children were hurt. Prosecutors say an attempted murder investigation has now been opened. French journalist Antonin André says it's put yet more pressure on President Emmanuel Macron.
His family were attacked in his house during the night, and his wife and his two children had to left the house in emergency because there was fire in the house. And this is what is a very shocking thing this morning. And every mayors in France wants that the state and Emmanuel Macron take more measures to stop the chaos.
2 people have been killed in a mass shooting in the US state of Maryland. Police say up to 30 people suffered gunshot wounds. 3 are critical. The attack happened in the city of Baltimore, where people had gathered for an event called Brooklyn Day. The suspect or suspects are reportedly still at large. The US President will meet King Charles and the Prime Minister when he visits the UK next week. Buckingham Palace has confirmed Joe Biden will visit Windsor Castle on the 10th of July. The White House says he's travelling to London to strengthen the close relationship between the nations. He'll then head to Lithuania for the NATO summit before heading on to Finland. New measures to deal with disruptive demonstrations have come into force. They include expanded police powers to move on static or slow-walking protests, like those used by Just Stop Oil. A criminal offence to tackle disruption in tunnels has also been introduced, carrying jail terms of up to 3 years. Critics say the laws threaten the right to protest. And rail passengers are facing yet more disruption over the next week. ASLEF members at 16 train companies in England will refuse to work overtime, which operators rely on to run their full timetable. The union says it's calling for fair pay, but the rail delivery group says ASLEF rejected its last offer of a £5,000 raise, which would bring the basic salary for drivers working a 4-day week to nearly £65,000. Services will be affected from Monday through to Saturday. TV online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now it's back to Simon with Free Speech Nation.
Welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Thank you, Rhiannon. Let's get some more questions from the audience. Our first question comes from Veronica.
Why are the French still rioting? It's been 5 days.
How many days of rioting would you have felt was appropriate? Just as a matter of interest.
An infinite number.
An infinite number. I mean, that is the traditional French approach, isn't it? Why are the French still rioting? The grandmother of the French teenager who was shot by police during a traffic stop has called for riots to cease. Clearly, she is not being regarded as an authority in the matter. Some 2,500 people have been arrested since Tuesday. Last night, more than 45,000 police officers were out on the streets attempting to ease tensions. No idea how well that's gone. I mean, what is your view on this, Steve?
Well, I think the actual sparking moment, the catalyst to it, has got many questions. Why does someone get shot during a traffic stop? That should never happen. Unless someone's driving the car at you, which we have the video to say that that wasn't happening. That's one issue that needs to be sorted. But clearly there is other pressures that are now starting to come to the surface. But we can't really judge. It's really easy to judge because I know this is France and they protest all the time and you say...
Well, we say that because, of course, there is the English prejudice against the French, but actually we're talking about North African communities within the France...
I was going to compare it to the 2011. It's not as if we don't have the same thing that's happened where some incident causes riots and looting that goes on for at least a few days. So we can't really... Let's go back to judging them for being French, obviously, but technically we can't.
We had about 2 days of rioting in 2011, I think.
Dramatic. And whether it's just because we don't have tear gas, I think that adds something, doesn't it, to the...
Yeah.
I know that sounds like I'm being silly, but it does look more dramatic and all these things on fire. It wasn't like that, was it, here? It was much
And we've only quite recently emerged. I mean, there's been a lot of rioting, as we're saying, in France, where most recently, I think they were rioting over the proposals to raise the age of retirement and the state pension from 62 to 64. So, I mean, they are, like, they're kindling, aren't they? They're very dry. It only takes a small spark. I do wonder whether I don't know whether we can project our own situation onto France. It feels like it is quite different in several ways. They have, for a long time, tried to oppress and suppress rather than assimilate many of these communities. Do you see any sort of prospect for that? Being resolved? Because France is constantly at threat of suddenly lurching to the far right. Marine Le Pen has obviously made a lot of progress since she took over from her father.
Yeah, I mean, if the question is, do I see any hope of it being resolved in relatively short order? No.
No.
So I think it will carry on like this for a while. Eventually the riots will stop, but the underlying problem will still be there.
Well. We will watch with interest and barely concealed delight. Our next question is from Laura. Who is Laura? Where is Laura? There's Laura. Hello.
Is Pride the best place to protest against oil?
Very good question. Is Pride the right place to protest against oil? Just Stop Oil stormed London's Pride Parade. London Pride, a great beer, of course, but now that has been usurped by this trendy programme. After issuing threats to the LGBTQ+ event earlier this week, 5 activists have been charged with behaviour likely to cause harassment, alarm or distress. 2 others were released on bail. Pending further inquiries, the group sat down in front of a Coca-Cola float, branding it the world's worst plastic polluter, accused of numerous human rights abuses. Personally, I will say, on the one hand, of course, you like to see 2 lefties fighting, so that's great. But also, perhaps more seriously, Coca-Cola is one of those examples of woke capitalism which has attempted to clamber on to the Pride Parade, that whole momentum they have, and get what is arguably some ill-earned credibility, because they are, in fact, a massive worldwide conglomerate who will not support Pride in countries where it isn't already, you know, the upward trend, like Goldman Sachs, like all the oil companies. It's such a cheap and easy way to gain a little bit of favourability with the kids, isn't it?
I think it actually gains them that much favourability. If you walk into a pub and you say, can I have a Coke? And they go, is Pepsi all right? You go, no, because of the gay Pride.
Yes. I understand that. But on the other hand, they are obviously, putting out... They are attempting to... What would they call it? Pride wash their brand.
Yeah, they call it pink wash or something, which is probably just as patronising.
That's just something I did to my pants at university and never let down.
I had a friend that used to sell Coke products to pubs, and he said the biggest problem was, where do you go to sell Coke? Everybody's got it already.
Yeah.
So, it's the perfect place to protest, isn't it? Because you've got a big audience, you're not stopping anybody from getting to work. Great idea.
And to be absolutely honest, I think, as our previous guest said, we're not ready yet to make this transition to electric cars and all the rest of it. A lot of people have to use vehicles to get to work, and getting in the way of those can be very annoying. Whereas stopping a Pride carnival, which is moving at 5 miles per hour and is a purely, demonstrative phenomenon anyway, go ahead.
And were they there for 16 minutes? It was 7 people who stopped it for 16 minutes.
Quick.
It's not the biggest
It's the new
disaster.
thing, isn't it? The police want you to know in exactly how many seconds they stopped the protesters.
Yeah.
16 minutes this time.
Yeah. Anyway, new legislation now, and hopefully the power hoses will be coming out shortly. Our next question is from Peter. There's Peter.
Has Hollywood become less interesting?
Now this is off the back of Dame Joan Collins, Dynasty star, and prior to that, various soft porn movies in the 70s. Dame Joan Collins, many of them, of course, authored by her sister, Jackie. They were the power duo of my childhood. She has enjoyed more than 7 decades in the spotlight and indeed in the satin sheet. She says the fear of cancel culture is taking all the fun out of Hollywood. She's talking more about the parties rather than the actual films, more than the content. She says that nowadays the red carpet events are very stage managed and that you don't get the same sort of drunken behaviour and so on. On the other hand, it was only a couple of years ago there was an actual fist fight on the stage at the Oscars, wasn't there? So I don't know. I think it's a bit harsh, but anyway, what do you think, Cressida?
Well, it's got to be true, hasn't it? I mean, I wasn't there.
No.
I'm not as familiar with her back catalogue as you are, Simon, but it seems...
The Stud, that's the one you want to watch.
Hey, that's my Sunday evening sorted. I mean, surely everything is getting more sensible, isn't it? Isn't it the case that young people don't even drink anymore?
Yeah, and they certainly don't have sex anymore. That is a fact. Yeah.
So just to give the counterbalance, that maybe she perceives that there's less raucous fun happening at the parties because she's now 90 and people are not trying to...
Yes, click with her. Absolutely, yeah. Time for your bed bath, Miss Collins. Yeah. Well, it's a good question. I mean, it is all a question of perception, isn't it? I think we all learned from the Johnny Depp trial that there was still quite a lot of bad behaviour going on behind the scenes. But there is increasingly an attempt to just smooth it over. I think you see the same thing with football stars. I'm sure they all behave quite badly, but they've just got bigger PR teams now.
Which actually I prefer. I don't want to see people who are already blessed with having a great career, loads of money, and having fun. No, rein in that fun. At least have some misery in your life.
That's the whole point. That's why you become a movie star, surely. I mean,
Absolutely.
Isn't that the main perk?
I watched a lovely interview with Peter O'Toole on one of the late night. I think it was Letterman, about a 20-minute series of anecdotes about getting drunk with Richard Harris and Oliver Reed and so on. And you think these people, the proper hell-raisers, they knew how to do it because, of course, the thing about drunks is they love the sound of their own voice, but in their case, everyone else loved the sound of their voices as well, so they're obviously encouraged. Nowadays, most actors are, in fact, literally doing most of their acting in front of green screen. I mean, it isn't really, what we understand as acting anymore, so understandably, they don't really know how to carry it on in the pub.
Yeah, well, and also, you're right, they won't have the drunks getting drunk with drunks. It'll be, I brewed some kefir with Gwyneth Paltrow.
Our next question is from Mark. Where is Mark? There's Mark.
Hi. How long can you get away with not showing up to work?
How long can you get away with not showing up to work? This is, of course, the Italian teacher who avoided not going to work. She didn't avoid not going to the double negative. She avoided going to work for 20 years using holiday sick leave and permits in a beautifully tessellated form with permits to attend conferences. She is now known as Italy's worst state employee. The teacher, 56 years old. She has basically reached in retirement age anyway. She was employed by a school, I say employed, near Venice to teach literature and philosophy. What else, of course, but only showed up for 4 out of the 24 years she worked there. I imagine she had access to some Derrida and Foucault to demonstrate that she had, in fact, been teaching in a meaningful sense throughout that time. Anyway, after being caught by the school's inspector, she was sacked last month. I mean, that's absolutely heroic legislation. At that level, you have to just stand back and applaud. But I suppose she is symbolic. We all will feel of a lot of... There is a general trend at the moment that people are avoiding work, not going in enough.
There certainly is. And then there are these claims, aren't there, by local authorities that the work, the output hasn't dropped at all since COVID, which almost implies they weren't doing any work to start with.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting. I do kind of think probably a lot of civil servants can work from home to an extent that, depending on what kind of work you're doing. I think teachers do actually need to be present, personally. I don't know.
Yeah. You don't want to have to send all the kids around to their house.
No.
Because that seems, a lot more more carbon.
We had, of course, I have 2 kids, both of whom did e-schooling during the COVID thing. It came and went a little bit, and I think theirs was a reasonably good school, but even so, it is extraordinarily inefficient, not just because the kid is reluctant and feels they're in hope, but there's a certain kind of psychological element to being in a room full of people, as you all are now, an audience all focused on a single person. If you're sitting next to other people who are all focused on it, it maintains your determination, your willpower, and I think that could be misunderstood or underestimated, perhaps.
But then again, flip side, she was teaching philosophy was one of the subjects, so actually maybe improved the country by having fewer people doing philosophy. You could improve productivity.
Absolutely. The fewer people who regard philosophy as a career, the better. That is definitely... Italy has already got quite a charge sheet on that front. So, we have a question from Padma now. Where's Padma? There we are.
Hello.
Hello.
Is it acceptable for MPs to get in a row with people on social media?
Yes, very good question. This is the particular example, but not a unique one. Catherine Birbalsingh, founder of the Michaela Community Free School, very well-known school, extraordinary results in London. From a disadvantaged cohort, she has achieved extraordinary results. She posted a 4-page open letter to Sir Keir Starmer accusing his shadow minister for domestic violence and safeguarding, that's Jess Phillips, of racism. The row between the pair began in May following the death of pop icon Tina Turner, when Ms Birbalsingh described the star as an iconic black voice of the 1980s and shared various different clips of her life, which unfortunately included pictures of her abusive ex-husband, Ike Turner, with the caption, "Good Times." Now, that was obviously an error, and Ms Birbalsingh, I think we hardly need say, did not absolutely endorse the domestic violence that was that marriage symbolises for many, but Jess Phillips pounced on her and tried to expose her to a degree of ignominy that was what did seem to me a little bit excessive.
I think you can make the bullying case. Reading parts of the 4-page letter, because it's 4 pages. I feel very much like Ross in Friends.
Yeah.
Front and back.
Yeah.
I felt like she'd set me homework, so I wasn't going to do it. But, you can make more of a case for the bullying or the wrong tone when trying to bring other people on social media in on this pile-on. But I also don't understand why there was a doubling down. Surely the correct response would be, oops, I was trying to make a GIF or a GIF, however you say it, and I got it wrong. I did a thing wrong, but there's been no whiff of that. It has been entirely... something happened, but I am now calling you a racist for pointing out
Catherine Birbalsingh, she cancelled... what is the word? Deleted the tweet, and she had said that she would never... Clearly, she would never have posted it if she'd realised that the icon Tina Turner thing... It does seem to me that Catherine, who has been on this channel, and people will be familiar with, is an extraordinary hate figure to the left because she has imposed very old-fashioned sort of discipline, almost the kind you might associate with a Victorian school or
Simon, she doesn't like smartphones for children. I mean, she's outrageous. She thinks we should teach Shakespeare in schools.
And that you should walk quietly in corridors and things like this, which just, anyone who hadn't been paying attention to education for the last few years would be baffled as to why this was provocative or controversial. But, and she's got extraordinary results, and it seems to really get under their skin. I mean, far more than most people like Toby Young or whatever, who you can see are deliberately provocative, even though they've done good things with free schools.
Right, and this is why she's accusing them of being racist, isn't it? She's saying, you're saying this because you want me to be a typical black person. You want me to have your views and I don't have them. I mean, whether that's a legitimate claim, I don't know.
Rings true to me. Our final question is from Paul. Paul. One of my favourite delicatessens. There he is.
Hello. Cricket has been found to be racist, sexist and elitist. Should it discriminate against the gay people too and complete the set?
Yes, cricket has been found racist, sexist and elitist by the Are Things Racist, Sexist and Elitist Committee, who depend on finding such answers to be correct. Well, I mean, I will just say before I go on that, I mean, it is clearly an extraordinarily elitist sport. It is systemically elitist. You have 2 aristocrats who are in bat and the peasants are surrounding them and they're given the opportunity to make them scatter here and there. But anyway, it's a very good question whether these sports do need overhauling. The report said it was deep-rooted and widespread in English cricket. They had certain ideas about things that should be cancelled, like the Eton and Harrow game, which you do feel maybe has a slight echo of a privileged past, I suppose. But the evidence and recommendations, the England and Wales Cricket Board, also known as the ECB, which is also, of course, the European Central Bank, acted on one recommendation saying more than 4,000 people provided evidence to the commission set up to look into the game. So perhaps I have been a little bit swift to denounce it as seeking and finding. But what do you think?
I don't know enough about cricket to have a knowledge either side of this, but it seems believable. So I've just put my caveat before my point there, I suppose.
Yeah.
I can imagine how, if you have a sport that carries on and probably no one checks to see whether certain attitudes need looking at, you can paint yourself into a corner. So it would be good to look to see whether we should be a bit less racist in our cricket. I honestly don't know enough about cricket, though.
It's very hard, to be honest, if you look at the England cricket side or any of the county sides, to believe that racism is rife, because there is certainly a lot of players of colour, as many, maybe not quite as many as you see in professional football, but they're getting there. What does seem to be the case is, I think, probably proceeds from the fact that a lot of state schools simply don't have the playing fields nowadays and don't regard cricket as the best use of the available space in order to encourage fresh air and exercise, which is the primary purpose of sport and games within an education. Well, this is the thing. Traditionally, of course, it's almost a philosophical problem.
It's not about the winning. Have you become one of those
sport
lefties?
For? Exactly. What is sport at the national level is about rubbing the Australians' noses in it. And, you know, to be honest, we are not in any position at the moment to minimise the talent available by trying to bring in affirmative action.
Look, I wouldn't know about that, and I can't speak to the racism, but I will say let boys have their spaces. I mean, do we have to have... I'm one of these people that thinks that we're all about women's spaces. Let's have some boys' spaces. If they want to go and have bad behaviour, go and do it in private. Yes. Apparently it takes all day. It's so long, they stop for a meal.
5 days.
Good. I mean, I don't want to be involved. I want to be excluded.
Look, cricket is also the only sport that seems to, every time they improve it, they do less of it. So they're like 24-hour. Extrapolate that, and the asymptote is node cricket. That's that's the way forward.
Single shot. After the break on Free Speech Nation, you will hear my take on the US presidential race and my thoughts on a surprise candidate that could cause a stir. Don't go away. See you in a couple of minutes.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions, and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio, and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Go.
And welcome back. Now, this is my first time guest hosting Free Speech Nation. I thought I might use the opportunity to sound a note of optimism for that principle, for free speech, the lifeblood of a healthy democracy, the right on which all others depend, and the sine qua non of mental health, in my view, at both the individual and national level. One of the most tantalising prospects offered for connoisseurs of open debate is the candidature for 2024 for the Democratic presidential nomination of one Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Any fit, young and healthy candidate would surely be a welcome innovation in American politics at the moment, let alone one carrying the most famous brand of youthful vigour and optimism in American political history. Both the default candidates, meanwhile, are campaigning to enjoy second terms they would end well into their 80s. Kennedy, at 69, is not only nominally younger, but evidently more vital than either Biden or Trump have been for years. Strategically released footage of him bare-chested and bench-pressing a moderate weight has emphasised that he is in very good shape, even for a middle-aged man. Some have suggested he may be benefiting from the sort of testosterone replacement therapy that is reshaping many older, wealthier men now. Jeff Bezos, for instance, much as Viagra did in a more targeted way only a generation ago. But more seriously and more intriguing for the discourse are a wide range of policy issues on which Kennedy has a long record of holding heretical views by any mainstream liberal standards, let alone those of a Democrat. He is most commonly described as an anti-vaxxer, but as is so often the case, this does little justice to the fully evolved, coherent and interconnected views he holds, most of which long preceded the advent of COVID-19, and most of which gather around a general suspicion that the USA's Food and Drug Administration is dominated by the vastly powerful business interests usually referred to as Big Pharma. Wikipedia asserts that Kennedy's rhetoric often utilises conspiracy theories, then gives as an example his contention that COVID pandemic served to benefit billionaires. According to Kennedy, they go on, the pandemic resulted in a $4.4 trillion shift in wealth from the American middle class to this new oligarchy that we created. 500 new billionaires with the lockdowns, and the billionaires that we already had increased their wealth by 30%. Well, whether or not he's right to invite us to draw sinister conclusions about the wisdom or necessity of lockdown from those figures, they are certainly broadly correct, and it is encouraging to see a senior political figure draw attention to them. Nor is Kennedy simply someone throwing up lots of talking points to see which ones stick. He has decades-long history of largely successful legal action on behalf of various underdogs, whether they be the victims of industrial pollution, cruel and counterproductive factory farming methods, or indigenous rights. He's put his money, his prestige, and his capacity for hard work and close reading where his mouth is, again and again. And perhaps most intriguingly, he holds some decidedly non-mainstream views about the forces behind the assassinations, both of his famous father and his even more famous uncle. Americans have famously enshrined the right to free speech in their First Amendment, but the reality is that until very recently, hearing that speech amplified was the privilege of a tiny minority. Only a decade ago, such troublesome opinions and inconvenient facts as Kennedy voices would likely have seen him sidelined, denied the newsprint and airtime of publicity, and unable to cast the seeds of doubt in the minds of voters, let alone mount a serious challenge to an incumbent president. Only 2 years ago, it was touch and go whether they could even maintain a Twitter account. Now, however, with platforms like Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson regularly attracting millions more than the networks to long conversations in which thoughtful individuals are allowed to express themselves and even correct themselves in real time without needless interruption and curtailment, there is a chance that things might finally be changing and a bit of genuine diversity of opinion may well get aired in 2024. And that, in my view, can surely only be a good thing. So, those are my views. What do you think, guys? Robert F. Kennedy Jr., have you seen much of him in action?
Yeah, I mean, when I first read that he was potentially running for president, I did think, if I were in that family, I think I'd probably stay out of politics.
The curse of the Kennedys, which they have talked about at length, not running for politics is no safeguard against early death, of course. That's the tragedy
I think he's
of it.
already done enough work to upset enough people. Anything that's putting a light on big pharma is a good thing, isn't it? I mean, I don't just mean the jab, but in general, I think drug companies are so powerful.
Yeah, we have no idea in this country how safe we are from it. I mean, one of the frustrating things about the health debate in the United Kingdom, I always feel, is that the only alternative is always presented as being the United States, which is clearly exceptionally dysfunctional and is run largely for the benefit of pharmaceutical companies. But yeah, he is almost a lone figure within the potential reach of government who stands up against that.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in part, it feels like it'd be great to split the debate into two, though, because getting into big pharma, the idea of big companies versus people, I know which side I fall down on, but then you start to hear details that you'd like a bit more flesh on the bone when it comes to some of the anti-vax things.
Well,
which actually, you're right, longer conversations would give that.
There is a 3.5-hour conversation with Joe Rogan, quite recently recorded, and I find the prospect of him, I mean, he won't become president, I don't suppose, but the prospect of somebody in that degree of authority openly discussing CIA involvement in the assassinations, just in terms of popcorn, that is like, that's class A, right?
That's very true, yeah. I went to see Professor Nutspeak recently here. The guy who compared horse riding to ecstasy.
Or aspirin.
Oh, aspirin. I didn't know that. OK. Well, he said that alcohol's quite dangerous, shock. Was fired anyway for being the drugs are. And he was talking a lot about pharmaceuticals, and I don't think we're completely getting off scot-free here, you know.
No, absolutely. And it is interesting how they cascade once you get into it as well. Obviously, I have elderly parents. Well, not obviously, but I do have elderly parents now. And, as soon as you start taking one thing, you have to take something else to counter. And before you know it, you've got a pill organiser, the size of a primary school art department. It's terrifying. Anyway, after the break on Free Speech Nation, we have an interesting case out of Mexico where a congressman has been found guilty of gender-based political violence for a Facebook post. That's not Southend, that's Mexico. We'll see you shortly.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
And action.
Sergeant, we've been greeted by superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello. GB.
And welcome back to Free Speech Nation. Now, a former Mexican congressman has been convicted of gender-based political violence over posts in which he referred to a transgender representative as a man who self-ascribes as a woman. Rodrigo Ivan Cortez, I don't know if he is of that ilk, who is head of political advocacy for the group called National Front for the Family, was also convicted of digital, symbolic, psychological and sexual violence. A real royal flush of violence there for using masculine references on Twitter and Facebook. Cortez has appealed his case to the Superior Chamber in Mexico, and his legal defense is being supported by ADF International. We can speak to its legal counsel, Tomas Enriquez, I hope that's the correct pronunciation, who joins us now from Washington. Hello, Tomas.
That was spot on, Simon. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So, what can you say? How can you flesh out this case for us?
Well, you get a fantastic summary on it, and this is fundamentally the issue. Unfortunately, the courts of law in Mexico, and specifically the electoral court for the federal judiciary, has been politicized, and more than that, weaponized by some who happen to belong to the ruling parties in Mexico, with the objective of silencing their opposition. Rodrigo's case, as you mentioned, involves specifically him being penalized by the courts for the mere fact of recognizing the undeniable fact that Salma Luevano, the transgender lawmaker, is in fact a man that identifies as a woman. But the court has said that it is unlawful for him to make such a distinction, as it is invidious against Salma Luevano. And Rodrigo's case is not the only one, as there are over five cases that have come up within the past year in which the courts have acted in the same way.
So, just for my benefit, and I might be a bit off the pace here a little bit, but presumably these conversations and these remarks were expressed in Spanish, would that be correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Is there, because obviously one of the issues we have with this whole concern and this wave at the moment is a question of language, and a lot of MPs in this country, and I believe in America as well, have been confronted with the question, what is a woman, and whether the word woman, it refers to a gender identity or to one's biological sex. Is that distinction made in Mexico in Spanish in the same way? Are there different words? Has there a transgression been made which won't automatically translate directly?
Yes, that is certainly the case. The Spanish language has this particularity shared with others that it is inherently gendered. Whenever you refer to a lawmaker, you can do it in the male form or the female form. And in this case, Rodrigo chose to use the male form because that is what he knows to be coherent with the reality of who Salma Luevano is. Of course, Salma Luevano identifies as a woman and wishes to be referred to in the female form, but Rodrigo in taking control of his own expression, has decided, I will not do this because this is a betrayal to which I know to be the truth and my witness to the truth as part of the political debate that is ongoing on this specific issue.
That seems reasonable enough. Where is Mexico generally on this issue? Do you have self-ID at the moment? Are there debates about biological males in women's prisons and so on?
The debate has really been stifled precisely because there's an attempt imposed from the top down by the courts to eliminate or avoid any sort of distinction altogether. As I mentioned, there have been other cases in which the unlawful offense by the speaker has been precisely making a distinction between trans women and women. The court has said in other cases that by introducing this distinction, you are in fact committing violence against women. Ironically, the same court uses it to the advantage of trans-identified individuals whenever it is their own claims that are being brought to court. And so they will, applying an intersectional matrix, suggest that because they are trans women and not just women, their rights or their pretenses would trump those of women. There have been cases in which the court has even acknowledged that the so-called trans women have themselves engaged in violence, and yet it has failed to actually sanction that misbehavior on their part because of an intersectional analysis by which they are more vulnerable than women generally, and thus they have introduced a distinction themselves. One of the cases that we are involved in as ADF International is that of Gabriel Cuadri, who is currently a sitting lawmaker in the parliament in Mexico, who has been also sanctioned by the same court after a complaint by the same lawmaker involving the same sort of facts. And the fact that he, in chambers, in parliament, in Congress, I should say, was suggesting that there was something that was fundamentally unfair about, quote, trans women taking the spots that were reserved for women with respect to political representation. And that was deemed as a political offense by the court and ultimately sanctioned against Gabriel Cuadri.
That seems very familiar, of course, from what we've seen more famously, world famously, as in America and also in the United Kingdom. And one of the phenomena that seems to be familiar is that lawmakers, parliamentarians, and of course academics discuss these things in what you refer to as the intersectional matrix and so on. The wider public, generally speaking, are inclined to be tolerant and want everybody to have a fair crack of the whip. But once they become apprised of the actual situation, the ramifications and implications, they are aroused to indignation. Would you say this was what's happening in Mexico, the general population behind this, or not so much?
I think that we're starting to see a groundswell of support for cases like that of Rodrigo or Gabriel Cuadri. The problem continues to be the fact that you have the political elites in control of political institutions that are, for the most part, taking sides with transgender activists. So we're not entirely sure where this will go, but as to Rodrigo and Gabriel Cuadri and other cases in which we are involved with, we are taking their cases internationally to the Inter-American Commission and then Court of Human Rights, protecting their free speech. We believe that it is absolutely self-evident that there has been a violation here. Their speech was absolutely peaceful. It was not an incitement to discrimination. It was not an incitement to violence. And therefore, it is unconscionable that they are being censored by their expressions, by the most fundamental political right that we all are entitled to.
I absolutely agree with you, Thomas. All the best, best wishes from GB News on that front. Thomas Enrique is there, ladies and gentlemen, from Washington. Still to come on Free Speech Nation, we have a shot putter proving herself to be the ultimate team player. We have the latest from the World Wife Carrying Championships. It's almost time for social sensations. Back in a moment.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to our final section. Now, every week we dedicate this part of the show to the world of social media and often the stories that are threatening to cancel someone or something. First up is this video from Finland of the World Wife Carrying Championships. Hundreds of beer lovers from across the globe took part to win their partner's weight in beer. So it's obviously a bit of a calculation. You wanted to fatten up just enough to make it worthwhile, but not enough to buckle under. Husbands were pictured purple in the face as they struggled to lug their wives around a sand obstacle course and deep water pool in the middle of summer, although that is a Finnish summer, of course. Wives have to be aged at least 17 and have to weigh at... I mean, that you would think goes without saying, and have to weigh at least 49 kilograms, which, to be honest, should go without saying as well. The winning prize will secure their husbands at least 49 litres of beer. I noticed earlier, incidentally, that Biden is off to Finland, isn't he, after he's done his visit to Windsor Castle. I don't know whether Dr. Biden, Dr. Jill is going to be hoisted onto his shoulders. That would probably end the second term prospects. Anyway, any ideas on that?
Well, at the start of that video, we saw the guy with the wife coming out of the water. I needed to see like 10 seconds before. Was her face under it? just dunk her for a while and then move on?
I know, she's gone with a helmet, but no snorkel kit. By the way, I bet the helmet causes an argument. You know, she doesn't trust him to definitely wear a helmet.
It's about time we have it the other way around, though. Surely,
Absolutely.
For equality's sake, the husband
they come
carrying.
over the bang into the. It would make a great start to a reboot of the Krypton Factor as well, wouldn't it? Next up, we have a video of a Belgian national shot putter showing the ultimate team spirit taking part in a hurdles race. Let's take a look at this. This is a regular hurdles race, and as you will see when they all head off, most of them are decent hurdlers. One of them, there he is. So I think the idea is he is actually the shot put and hammer throw champion. His name is Jolene, which is a bit bizarre as well. Well, maybe it was a her. Jolene Boomquo displayed great team spirit at the European Championships. Oh, it is a she. She ultimately had to step in because her teammate who was unable to race on the day, and she ran 100 metres hurdles to save her team from getting disqualified entirely. She's a 29-year-old, finished the race, winning her team an important 2 points. Looks like she wasn't made aware, however, that you aren't actually disqualified in a hurdles race if you knock the hurdle over. It just slows you down a bit. So she could have just charged straight through them, which would have been fine. Yeah. But,
I think this is you now saying it's not the winning, it's the taking part that counts. Twice now. You've become a big lefty on the show.
It's the taking apart that counts, yeah. Have you ever run hurdles?
No, Simon, I've never run hurdles.
I tried to run at them once. They're ridiculously high and solid, these things. You would assume if you clatter into one, you can actually do yourself a mischief. So
that's why I don't do it, yeah. Neither does she, though.
Anyway, good team spirit. I don't know why she will get cancelled for that. I don't think there's any danger of it. Finally, this is the moment a passerby threw milk over a group of Just Stop Oil protesters as they held up traffic during one of their latest slow-marching stunts. Let's take a look at this. Here he goes. The man in Hammersmith filmed himself approaching the Just Stop Oil as he muttered, having a laugh, this lot. There it is. The shoe is on the other foot.
Presumably they are all vegan, are they? Is it more offensive?
Oh, I hadn't even thought of that.
Well, let's hope it was oat milk. I don't know.
That's disgusting. Or oat, what do they call it? Oat jizz now? Because it's not technically milk. I don't know if you're allowed to say that. Anyway.
You just did.
That's the colloquial term. But, I mean, what do you milk to get an oat from an oat? There's no...
Yeah. In fact, there was a court case in America that unless it was something that you could milk, it shouldn't be called a milk.
Yeah.
And I was with that court case until the people bringing it said that you should call it nut juice. I'm not walking in... I'm not walking in Costa and asking for some nut juice in me drink.
Nut juice city limits. Now, we come to the part of the show where we talk through your unfiltered dilemmas. I think to an extent we just have discussed an unfiltered dilemma, haven't we? But our first technical dilemma comes from Lewis. I'll read this one out for you. I left my barbecue outside over winter and once caught a fox urinating on it, as you do. Didn't have a baseball bat or a kimono to hand. I then forgot to clean it. Forgot, yeah, righto. Only to come home one evening last week and found my partner had fired it up and was cooking his dinner on it. Should I tell him? What do you think, Chris?
I would keep that in the back pocket. There'll come a time when you want to tell him.
Yeah.
Don't waste it.
Yeah, you're so stupid you didn't even realise. I would imagine a decently heated barbecue will burn off any residue, right? You're the scientist.
Oh, definitely. You're achieving temperatures, which is well known in the science community.
Yeah.
There is a temperature above which fox urine degrades. And we all learned that in the first year, and you definitely achieve that with hot coals.
And what do they say? The dose is the poison, right? A little bit of fox urine might be good for you, right?
If anything,
like a
it builds
homeopathic...
up your tolerance.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Eventually, you'll be able to neck it.
I don't... This is like how that guy in The Princess Bride managed to gradually develop his immunity. We have a golden retriever who goes out into the back garden every time he can hear or smell a fox out there at all. And there is a kind of war of the urine going on. And sometimes overnight the fox comes in and will deliberately... Bucky, his name is the dog. The fox will deliberately wee on his toys. It's so horrible, and it really does stink, you know. So I can't imagine that this guy fired up the barbecue without being aware that if there was anything on there, you would get a whiff of it anyway. I think it's probably safe. There's the other one, isn't it? If you accidentally knock your partner's toothbrush into the loo, do you tell them?
I hadn't heard of that, Simon.
Our final dilemma this week is from Penny. I love GB News and I have a crush on Peter Edwards, the former editor of Labour List. I just love his combative style. Is he as great in real life as he appears on screen? Well, if that's him appearing on screen, I don't know. But anyway, I've never met the chap. Have you ever encountered him, Steve?
No, never had the pleasure. It sounds like I'm missing a trick here. Sounds like...
I'll look out for him.
Who's your biggest GB News crush? Straight off the top of your head, don't filter or edit.
Oh, it's the cleaner you've never met.
Do you have a GB News crush?
Yeah. No, we're out of time.
Oh, we're not out of time.
I'm not out of time. I've always found Gloria to be a very attractive... She used to be the MP for where I used to live.
Yeah.
There's something about being an MP
real answers.
I believe that Jacob Rees-Mogg is attracting quite a sizable female following these days. It's
Just
always
the
the
one,
ones you
it's
don't
huge.
suspect, isn't it? Anyway, we will make sure that our former Labour leader or Labour list chap is informed of the crush cohort that is starting to follow him. In the meantime, thank you for joining us on Free Speech Nation. This was the week when France went up in flames, Labour MP Jess Phillips was accused of outright racism, and banks decided your money was no longer good enough if you don't agree with their agenda. Thank you to my panel, Cressida Wetton, ladies and gentlemen. And Steve N. Allen. And to my guests, whom by fire, James Woodhoughton and John Christopher Boa and Thomas Henriquez from Washington, D.C. I've completely forgotten what it was called there for a moment. If you want to join us live in the studio and be part of our wonderful audience, you can go to sroaudiences.com. That's at the bottom of the screen. Stay tuned after this break for the brilliant Mark Dolan Tonight. That's coming up next. Don't forget that Headliners is on every night at 11 p.m. I'm often hosting that on Mondays and Tuesdays. That's the late night paper review where the comedians will talk you through the next day's stories. Meantime, thank you. Good night.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. Looking at the week ahead, we'll see rain or showers at times, but there will be some sunshine, particularly towards the end of the week, and temperatures will start to rise as well. We can see that nicely on the bigger picture, quite unsettled at the moment, tightly packed isobars indicating quite a brisk wind at times, and you can see outbreaks of rain. But as we move towards the end of the week, it should settle down a little. So back to Sunday evening, and we continue to have showers across the northern half of the UK. Plenty of clear spells overnight further south and east. Perhaps some longer spells of rain as well across northern parts of Scotland. And generally temperatures, towns and cities, low double figures, perhaps just a few spots in the countryside dipping into single figures. But it means quite a bright start for Monday morning. Yes, there'll be showers from the word go across western areas, some of these turning quite heavy as we move through the day. Perhaps some longer spells of rain across northern parts of Wales into northern England. At the same time, this band of rain continues to slowly sink southwards across northern Scotland. Quite a breezy day, gusts of 30 miles an hour or so, so it will feel quite cool in and around showers, top temperatures getting into the low 20s across the southeast. Monday evening, we continue to see showers across the southern half of the UK, some of these heavy at times. That band of rain still slowly pushing its way southwards across Scotland. And then overnight into Tuesday morning, a more persistent spell of rain across southern counties of England and Wales. Here, temperatures around 13 or 14 degrees. Under clearer skies further north, perhaps dipping into single figures. So a wet start across southern counties.